UK law, most common offences. In this presentation, we are going to be looking at some of the most common do's and don'ts with regards to the law in England. You will hear terms like illegal or legal. These terms sound very similar, but there is a crucial difference. Legal means what is allowed by law, and illegal is the opposite, what it is not allowed by law. A general principle with regards to use of violence is that it is illegal to inflict physical force or violence onto another person, and whoever does that can be brought to court. There are some exceptions. For example, a doctor can use restrictive force if that is needed to carry out a treatment, for example, towards a patient. Or it is legal to use restricted force if you are playing, for example, in team sports like rugby. Many people ask questions in relation to self-defense. Is it ever okay to hit somebody if you are protecting yourself, your family, or your property? Well, UK law dictates that the force or violence may be used by an individual to defend themselves. You are also permitted to act preemptively, so to intervene even before the attack, for example, was to take place. However, we have to be very careful with that. The use of force and violence is permitted for self-defense and for the defense of property like your house or your car, for example. But it must be proportionate and reasonable. And it must be the last resort and absolutely necessary. An example that force, for example, was the last resort and absolutely necessary in a situation would be to show that you have attempted an initial retreat or a withdrawal from the situation. So say, for example, you are out in town and someone approaches you and attacks you. Instead of attacking back, you could try and walk away, or put your hand out and ask that person to stop, or say you're going to call the police, removing yourself from the situation. So that would be an evidence to show that you have used force if you indeed ended up that you had to attack the person, but it was in self-defense and first you tried to remove yourself from the situation. So who decides what's proportionate, what's reasonable, for example? Who decides whether it's reasonable to attack a person that you might have found in your living room that was attempting to steal some of your property? Well, ultimately, it's the court. So it really depends on the context. The court will look at what was happening. The court will see whether you've made attempt to remove yourself from the situation. The court will see whether you attempted to also diffuse, possibly, a situation. And the court will decide ultimately what that means, what reasonable and proportionate means within the context. One thing that has to be said is that usually the court will also take into account the individual's mental and physical health. So, if you felt under threat, or because of your mental health, so you suffer, say, from anxiety, for example, and therefore you perceive a greater threat than what actually the threat is, or you might have experienced heightened fear of the consequences of a potential attack, then the court will also take that into consideration. But moving forward, I would say let's be very careful in defending yourself by force or violence. Always try to remove yourself from that situation if you can first and call 999. Another question that people often ask is whether it is legal, for example, to carry a weapon like a knife or a baseball bat or anything like that with themselves when they're out for the purpose of self-defense. UK law is very clear on that. The only weapon, if you like, or product that is legal for self-defense in the UK is a rape alarm. It is illegal to carry guns, and it is illegal to carry a pocket knife, especially a non-locking pocket knife with a blade that is over 3 inches, that is 7.62 centimeters long. If you carry a knife with a longer blade, like a bread knife, you must have a very, very good reason for it. So, for example, you might have just bought it in a shop and you're carrying it at home, but that knife will be in its original packaging, for example. So the same principle goes for any other instrument that could be used as a weapon. For example, it would be very, very difficult to justify the fact that you're going around with a very long stick or a baseball bat when you're in a nightclub. With regards to smoking, things are much more simpler and straightforward. In 2007, the so-called smoking ban came into force, which made it illegal to smoke in all enclosed public spaces and work areas. For example, if you are at a train station waiting for a train, it is illegal to smoke inside the waiting area, or also on the platform if you spot the no smoking sign. You will often find a smoking area outside these places, and usually you need to take at least 20 steps away from the entrance of a particular place, whether it is a waiting area or a GP surgery, for example, or a pub or a nightclub. It is illegal to buy cigarettes for anyone under the age of 18 or if you are under the age of 18. It is illegal as well to smoke in a car with anyone under the age of 18, even if you keep the window open. Sometimes people ask about vaping, those are the e-cigarettes. And though these are not covered by the smoking ban, usually it is considered very antisocial to e-vape in an enclosed space, in a GP surgery or in a waiting area of say, a train station or an office, and sometimes even in pubs. Just keep a lookout for a no vaping and no smoking sign if you are in doubt. With regards to drinking alcohol, it is legal, so you're allowed to drink alcohol in your own homes, in some public spaces, unless you see an alcohol-free area sign. So in Lancaster, for example, you will spot a sign around the railway station that is a non-drinking sign. So you cannot go around with a bottle of beer or wine and drink it in that particular area of Lancaster. It is illegal for anyone under the age of 18 to buy alcohol in supermarkets or corner shops or anywhere else. And most places now in Lancaster and throughout the UK use an under 25 policy. That means that if you are lucky enough to look under 25, then you'll be required to provide an ID card. So like, for example, your biometric or your asylum registration card to prove that you're over the age of 18. If you do not have that on you, then there's not much point in arguing because that's something that happens here. And contrary to what you might think, if you have been in town in Lancaster on a Friday or Saturday night, you will have seen quite a number of people quite merry and drunk. It is actually illegal to be drunk and disorderly. So if you get drunk and then you get into a fight, that actually can be classed as an offence and you can be arrested. And finally, on drinking, it is illegal to be drunk and drive. Under no circumstances you will be allowed by law to be drunk, to be over the limit and drive. And finally, in the last slides, we have a little summary of other common offences. For example, some of you will have been fined even when having a ticket for a particular journey on a train, and I've asked you how that happened. That's because in the UK, when travelling by train, you must always have a valid ticket for that particular journey. So always ensure that you know which train you're allowed to travel on, whether peak times, usually between 8 and 10, or off-peak. So always make sure that you understand what kind of ticket you're buying and for what train. When travelling by bus as well, you must buy your ticket as you enter the bus, most often than not, here in Lancaster by paying with cash. But be careful, if you travel in London and some other big cities, you will be asked to buy a ticket before you board the bus. You must have a TV license if you have a TV. So if you watch TV, even if you use the TV as a way of streaming from internet, or if you download anything from BBC iPlayer, you must have a TV license. And there is a link on this slide that you can look up to find more information. And finally, to drive in the UK, you must have a legal driving license. And your car must be insured and taxed and have an up-to-date MOT. Without actually an up-to-date MOT, you probably will not be able to insure or tax your car anyway.